The air in the glass-walled boardroom smelled of stale coffee and expensive cologne. It was the most important meeting in the history of Garrick Industries, and I was holding a silver tray of water glasses. My hands didn't shake, even though my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Adler, the acting CEO, stood at the front of the room. He was a tall man with a smile that never reached his eyes. He was mid-speech, pitching a merger to the board of directors. He spoke about synergy and future-proofing, but I knew the truth. He was planning to strip the company's assets and sell them off, a move that would destroy my grandfather's legacy and bankrupt the employee pension fund. I stepped forward. The carpet swallowed the sound of my cheap shoes. "The valuation is wrong," I said clearly, my voice cutting through his drone. "If you sign this, you bankrupt the pension fund." Adler snapped. His face turned a violent shade of purple. He slammed his hand on the mahogany table, shattering the silence. "You are just an intern, Brielle," he shouted, his spit flying. "Nobody listens to you. Get out before I have security drag you out." I didn't flinch. I set the water tray down gently. The ice clinked. I walked past the empty chairs of the vice presidents. The room went deadly silent. I pulled out the heavy leather chair at the head of the table, the chairman's seat, and sat down. "Are you insane?" Adler laughed nervously, looking around the room for support. "Get up." I looked up at him, my eyes cold and steady. "The meeting doesn't start until the majority shareholder is seated," I said. "I'm seated. Now sit down, Adler." My name is Brielle. Until 10 seconds ago, Adler and everyone in this room thought I was just the fetch coffee girl. They were wrong. My mind flashed back to 6 months ago. I was standing in the rain at the grave of my grandfather, Garrick. He was the founder of Garrick Industries, a man who built an empire from nothing. He had left me everything, 51% of the voting stock. I was the secret heir. But his will had come with a strange, specific condition. The lawyer had handed me a letter in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. "Don't take the throne until you know who the snakes are," it read. "Watch them when they think no one matters." So I entered the company not as the heiress, but as an unpaid intern in the archives department. I dyed my blonde hair a dull brown. I wore oversized thrift store clothes that hid my figure. I went by my middle name. I wanted to see how they treated the nobodies. I wanted to see the truth. My first week on the job was a brutal awakening. That was when I first met Adler. He was charismatic to the board, handsome in a slick way, but cruel to everyone beneath him. I was sweeping up shredded paper in the hallway when he stormed past. A janitor was emptying a bin, making a slight clattering noise. Adler stopped and screamed at the man, calling him useless and threatening his job over a simple noise. Later that afternoon, he introduced me to the logistics team. He didn't use my name. He just gestured vaguely at me and said, "This is the temp. She's here to do the grunt work. Don't let her speak in meetings unless spoken to." I stood in the corner, clutching my notepad. Adler ignored me completely, which was exactly what I wanted. He started shredding documents right in front of me. I glanced at the strips of paper falling into the bin. They looked like safety reports for the factory floor. My grandfather had always prioritized safety over profit. Adler was erasing that standard. When he left for lunch, I didn't go to the break room. I took out a small black journal and started writing. Every insult, every shredded paper, every cut corner, it all went into the book. I needed allies, or so I thought. I was assigned to report to Isolde, the director of HR. On the surface, Isolde was the warmest person in the building. She had photos of her cats on her desk and always kept a jar of candy for staff. She played the role of the motherly corporate figure perfectly. I decided to test her loyalty to the company. During my second week, while organizing files, I found a discrepancy in the accounts. It was small, but it was there. I brought the file to her office. "Isolde," I said quietly, "I think I found an error in the quarterly accounts. The numbers don't match the bank statements." Isolde smiled sweetly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She took the file from my hands. "Good catch, honey," she said, patting my hand. "You have a sharp eye. I'll handle it immediately. Don't worry your pretty little head about it." I felt relieved. I thought she was one of the good ones. But the next day, I went to check the file. It was gone. When I asked Isolde, she frowned. You must have lost it, Brielle. You really need to be more organized. She wasn't fixing the error. She was covering for someone. I realized then that the rot went deeper than just Adler. By month 2, the company was bleeding cash. The stock price was dipping, and morale was at an all-time low. I knew how to fix the logistics issue without firing anyone. My grandfather had taught me the business since I was a child. I spent 3 nights working on a proposal. It was a strategy to modernize our shipping routes. It would save millions. I didn't want to reveal my identity yet, so I anonymously left the printed proposal on Adler's desk in a plain manila folder. I waited nervously for the Monday morning meeting. Adler walked in, holding my folder. He stood at the front of the room and projected my slides onto the screen. I've been working on a solution, Adler announced proudly. This is my strategy to save the quarter. He presented every single one of my ideas as his own brilliance. The room erupted in applause. He got a standing ovation from the board members. I was standing at the very back of the room, holding a tray of lukewarm coffee. Adler looked right at me over the heads of the executives. He winked. A cold chill went down my spine. He knew I wrote it. He knew I was the anonymous source. And he knew that as its temp, I couldn't do a single thing about it. I couldn't just watch anymore. I needed hard proof, not just stolen ideas. One evening, I stayed late. I told the night guard I was organizing files for the archives. The office was empty, bathed in the blue light of computer monitors. I slipped into Adler's office. My heart was racing. I guessed his password on the 3rd try. It was his own last name followed by CEO. The arrogance of the man was his weak point. I found a hidden server drive labeled Project Phoenix. I clicked it open. What I saw made me sick to my stomach. Adler wasn't just incompetent, he was malicious. He was stripping the company's assets to sell them to a private equity firm. I scrolled through the emails. The private equity firm was run by his brother-in-law. It was an inside job. They planned to sell the factories for parts and liquidate the pension fund of 5,000 workers. These were men and women who had worked for my grandfather for 30 years. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket. My hands trembled as I copied the files. The progress bar seemed to crawl. 90%, 99, done. I yanked the drive out just as I heard the elevator ding down the hall. I had the smoking gun. I tried to give him one last chance. I was naive. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I confronted him with logic, he would back down. I booked a 5-minute slot on his calendar under the pretense of intern feedback. I walked into his office. He didn't even look up from his phone. Make it quick, Brielle. I have a golf game at 3. I looked at the sale figures for the merger, I said, keeping my voice steady. They don't add up. The valuation is too low. You're selling the company for half of what it's worth. Adler finally looked up. He let out a harsh, barking laugh. He stood up and walked around his desk, leaning against the edge to tower over me. You think because you know Excel, you know business, he sneered. You are a child, you file papers. Stick to ordering lunch, Brielle, the adults are talking. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. Get out. The condescension burned my face like a slap. He didn't just see me as an employee, he saw me as an insect. I walked out of his office with my head down, but my resolve was harder than steel. He had made a grave mistake. I decided to play dirty. If he wanted to treat me like a child, I would act like a ghost. I couldn't reveal my identity until the board meeting, but I could start a fire. I printed a single page of the real valuation, the one that showed how much money Adler was hiding. I left it on the table in the employee break room during the lunch rush. It took 10 minutes. I sat in the corner eating a sandwich, watching. A junior accountant picked it up. His eyes went wide. He whispered to a colleague. Within an hour, rumors were spreading like wildfire among the staff. Panic began to set in. Adler stormed out of his office, his face red. He screamed at the entire department. Who leaked this? He bellowed. This is confidential data. I will fire everyone in this room. His eyes scanned the crowd. He landed on me. I was standing by the copier, looking innocent and terrified. He stared at me with pure hatred. He suspected me, I could tell, but he couldn't prove it. I was just the intern. I wasn't supposed to understand those numbers. He turned away, punching the wall in frustration. The cracks in his armor were showing. The next morning, I was called into Isolde's office. The mood was different this time. There was no candy offered. Isolde sat behind her desk, her fingers interlaced tightly. She looked nervous. "Adler thinks you're a distraction," she said, her voice tight. "He feels you aren't fitting into the corporate culture here. He wants to terminate your internship." I sat in silence, waiting. Isolde slid a paper across the desk. "However," she continued, "we are generous people. We are offering you a severance package, 2 weeks' pay, a glowing recommendation letter for your next job." "What's the catch?" I asked. "You just need to sign this NDA," she said, tapping the document. I picked it up and read it. It wasn't just a non-disclosure agreement. It was a gag order. It forbade me from ever speaking about the company's finances, the merger, or Adler, under threat of $1 million lawsuit. I looked up at Isolde. "I don't sign things I haven't read thoroughly, Isolde," I said calmly. I slid the paper back to her, unsigned. "I won't sign it." Isolde's mask slipped. For a second, she looked terrified. She knew if I didn't sign, I was a loose cannon. "Brielle, be reasonable," she hissed, but I just stood up and walked out. 3 days before the board meeting, the axe fell. Adler couldn't wait any longer. He saw me walking through the open plan office carrying a stack of mail. "Stop right there," he shouted. The entire floor went quiet. Phones stopped ringing, typing ceased. Adler marched up to me. He wanted an audience. He wanted to make an example of me. "You're fired," he announced, his voice echoing off the walls. "You're incompetent, you're slow, and you're bad for morale. I want you gone. Now, pack your box. Security will escort you out." I looked around. My coworkers, people I had helped, people I had brought coffee to, looked down at their desks. Nobody defended me. They were too afraid of him. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked to my desk and packed my small cardboard box. I put my black journal inside. I walked to the elevator. Adler was watching me with a smug grin, arms crossed. Before the elevator doors closed, I looked him dead in the eye. "See you on Tuesday," I said. Adler laughed, a loud, cruel sound. "You're banned from the building, sweetheart. You're nothing." The doors slid shut, hiding his laughing face. I took a deep breath. He thought the game was over. He didn't know it was just beginning. The weekend before the meeting was a blur of activity. I met with my grandfather's legal team at a private estate outside the city. They were old, shark-like lawyers who had worshipped Garrick. When I told them what Adler was doing, they were furious. They briefed me for 12 hours straight. "Once you sit in that chair, Brielle," the lead lawyer, Mr. Henderson, said, "you are the chairman. You have the voting power to override the entire board, but you have to be in the room. If you aren't in the seat when the meeting is called to order, Adler can force the vote through." I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a tired college student. That had to change. I went to a high-end salon. I dyed my hair back to its natural, bright blonde. I cut it into a sharp, powerful bob. I went to a tailor and bought a navy blue suit that fit perfectly, no more baggy thrift store sweaters. I bought sharp heels. When I looked in the mirror on Monday night, the intern was gone. The girl who fetched coffee was gone. Staring back at me was Brielle Garrick, the owner of a billion-dollar company. I looked like a shark. I was ready to eat. Tuesday morning arrived with a gray sky. It was the day of the vote. My stomach was in knots, but my mind was clear. I arrived at the headquarters at 8:45 a.m. I saw Adler through the glass lobby doors. He was high-fiving the other board members. They were laughing, ready to sell the company and cash out their stock options. They thought it was a done deal. I walked to the turnstiles. I tapped my old intern badge. Beep beep. Red light. Access denied. Adler had deactivated it. Ronan, the security guard, was at the desk. He was a good man. I used to bring him hot chocolate on cold mornings. He looked at me, confused by my new appearance. "Miss Brielle, is that you?" "Good morning, Ronan," I said. "I need to get upstairs." "I can't," he said. Looking sad, "Adler gave strict orders, you're banned." I reached into my purse and pulled out a legal document with a gold seal. "Read this, Ronan." He put on his glasses. He read the header, Deed of Trust, Garrick Estate. His eyes went wide. He looked at the paper, then at me. He understood immediately. He didn't ask questions. He swiped his master key card. The turnstile opened with a green light. "Good luck, ma'am." I walked to the elevator. The ride up to the 40th floor felt like it took a lifetime. The numbers ticked up. 2030 3940. The doors opened. The executive floor was quiet. I walked down the long hallway toward the boardroom. The click-clack of my heels on the marble floor was a steady rhythm of war. I reached the heavy double doors. I could hear Adler's voice coming from inside. He sounded confident, arrogant. "We cut the dead weight," I heard him say. "The intern is gone. It's smooth sailing from here. Gentlemen, we are about to be very wealthy men." I checked my watch. It was exactly 9:00 a.m. The meeting was scheduled to begin now. I didn't hesitate. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy oak doors open with both hands. They swung wide, hitting the stops with a loud thud. Every head in the room turned. Adler stopped mid-sentence. The air left the room. It was time to finish this. The room was frozen, just as I had left it in my memory. I sat at the head of the table, my hands resting on the cool wood. Adler was sputtering, his face regaining that ugly purple color. "Security!" he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Someone get this girl out of here. She is trespassing." The doors opened behind me. Ronan, the guard, stepped into the room. He looked massive in his uniform. He crossed his thick arms over his chest and stood by the door. "I can't do that, sir," Ronan said, his voice deep and calm. "She has the clearance." "What clearance?" Adler shrieked. "She's a fired intern." He turned to Isolde. "Do something, your HR, get her out." Isolde wasn't moving. She was staring at the file folder I had placed on the table in front of me. It had the distinct, embossed seal of the Founders Trust, the Garrick family crest. Isolde went pale. She knew what that seal meant. She had worked for my grandfather for years. "Adler," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Shut up." Adler froze, shocked that his ally was silencing him. The silence stretched, tight as a rubber band. I stood up slowly. I didn't shout. I spoke with a voice that was different, authoritative, deep, the voice my grandfather used when he commanded a room. "My name is not just Brielle," I said, looking at each board member in the eye. "It is Brielle Garrick. I am the granddaughter of the man who built this table." Adler looked like he had been shot. He staggered back, gripping the back of his chair. That's impossible. You're a kid. You're a nobody." "I am the majority shareholder," I said, sliding the trust deed across the shiny table. It spun and stopped right in front of him. "I hold 51% of the voting stock, and I am calling this meeting to order." The other board members gasped. They started whispering frantically to each other. Adler picked up the deed. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. He read the name. He read the date. The truth hit him like a freight train. Adler stammered. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "That was the point." Adler was a survivor. I had to give him that. He was a cockroach who could survive a nuclear blast. He immediately switched gears. The shock vanished, replaced by a fake, oily charm. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Brielle, my God." He spread his arms wide. "Why the secrecy? If we had known, we would have rolled out the red carpet. We would have given you the corner office." He laughed, a hollow sound. "Well, as majority shareholder, you'll be happy to know this sale is going to make you very, very rich. We are talking hundreds of millions for your share alone." He was trying to charm me. He thought I was young, stupid, and greedy. He thought money was the only language I spoke. He walked toward me, hand extended. "I'm not here to get rich, Adler," I said, ignoring his hand. I sat back down. "And I'm not here to sell, I'm here to audit you." His smile faltered. Audit, there's no need for that, our books are open. Are they? I asked. Then you won't mind if I show the board what I found in your hidden drive. You said the company is failing, I said, addressing the silent board members. You told them revenue is down, but I spent 6 months in the archives. I know where you buried the profits. I plugged my laptop into the projector cable. The screen behind me flickered to life. Up came the Intern's project, the logistics plan I had worked on in Chapter 5, but I had made changes. I overlaid it with the data from Adler's secret Project Phoenix drive. You've been suppressing revenue, I explained, using a laser pointer to circle the figures. You moved earnings into shell accounts to lower the stock price artificially. You wanted the company to look like it was dying so your friends could buy it cheap. Graphs appeared on the screen. They showed a healthy, thriving company being suffocated by its own CEO. This isn't a merger, I said. This is a robbery. Adler watched the screen. His face was gray. He looked like a trapped animal. The data was undeniable. It was his own data, his own secret files, projected 10 feet tall for everyone to see. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The other board members were greedy, yes, but they were also victims of Adler's scam. They were looking at the screen, doing the math. One of the older members, Mr. Sterling, stood up. Adler, he said, his voice low, if you suppress the stock price, our options are worth half of what they should be. You were stealing from us too. Adler started sweating. Beads of perspiration rolled down his forehead. She's lying, he shouted, pointing at me. She's upset she got fired. These are doctored spreadsheets. You can't trust a disgruntled intern. I didn't argue. I pointed a finger at Isolde. Isolde, I said sharply, you are the director of HR and payroll. Verify the records. Did Adler authorize bonus payments to these shell companies? Yes or no? Isolde looked at Adler, who was manic and screaming. Then she looked at me. She looked at the power I held. She was a survivor, too. Isolde, Adler warned. Yes, Isolde whispered, her voice shaking. He did. I processed the payments. That was the breaking point. Adler screamed at Isolde. You traitor, you useless cow. He lost his cool completely. The mask was gone. He turned on the board. I built this company. Garrick was a dinosaur. He didn't know how to monetize. I did this. I deserve this. He slammed his fists on the table, turning to me. And you're a little girl playing dress-up. You think you can run this place? You're nothing. You fetched my coffee. You emptied my trash. He was digging his own grave. Every word he shouted made him look more unstable. The board members were recoiling, leaning away from him. He was proving every doubt they had. I am the CEO, he roared. I am this company. I waited for him to finish. I let his screams echo and fade until the room was perfectly silent again. You are finished, I said simply. I looked around the table. I move for a vote of no confidence in the CEO, effective immediately, I said. Adler's eyes bulged. You can't do that. I have 51% of the vote, I reminded him. I don't even need the others. I can fire you all by myself. But out of respect for the board, let's see who stands with the fraud. I raised my hand, all in favor of removing Adler. Mr. Sterling raised his hand immediately, then another member, then another. Even the ones who were Adler's friends realized the ship was sinking. They didn't want to go down with him. Within 10 seconds, every single hand in the room was up. Even Isolde raised her hand, avoiding Adler's gaze. It was unanimous. The motion carries, I said. I looked at Adler. It's over. You're fired, Adler, I said, my voice cutting like a knife. For cause, that means no severance package, no golden parachute, no stock options, and the legal team is waiting outside to discuss the embezzlement charges. Adler stood there, blinking. He couldn't process it. He was a powerful man. This didn't happen to him. I'm not leaving, he hissed. This is my office. He grabbed the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles white. I nodded to the door. Ronan. Ronan stepped forward. He uncrossed his massive arms. Don't make me carry you, sir, he said. Adler looked at Ronan, then at me. He saw no mercy. He let go of the table, but he didn't go quietly. As he walked to the door, he shouted threats. "I'll sue you. I'll destroy this place. You'll regret this." Ronan took him by the arm and firmly escorted him out. The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off his screaming. The silence that followed was beautiful. The room was quiet. The remaining board members were terrified. They shifted in their seats, afraid to look at me. They had been complicit in their silence for months. I turned my gaze to Isolde. She was trying to make herself small in her chair. "You helped him, Isolde," I said. "You knew about the firing, you knew about the fraud, you covered it up." Isolde's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared," she pleaded. "I have a family, Brielle. He threatened me. I didn't have a choice." "We all have choices," I said coldly. "So did the 5,000 workers you were about to bankrupt. They have families too." I stood up and walked over to her. "I can't trust you, Isolde. You can resign right now, or I can testify against you in the embezzlement trial. Choose." Isolde sobbed. She nodded weakly. She grabbed her purse and fled the room, weeping. The boardroom was finally clean. I thought it was over, but just as the meeting was ending, the doors burst open again. A man in a sharp gray suit stormed in. It was Adler's personal lawyer, a man known for being a viper. "Stop," he shouted. "This vote is illegal." The board members gasped. I frowned. "On what grounds?" "The intellectual property clause," the lawyer smirked. He pulled out a document. Brielle signed an intern contract. Clause 14 states that any work, research, or IP created by an employee belongs to the company. However, since she was terminated for incompetence, she has no right to use company data, the evidence she showed you, to influence a shareholder vote. It's a breach of contract. It was a desperate, confusing legal knot. It was nonsense, but it was meant to stall the vote and tie us up in court for months. The board hesitated. They were scared of lawsuits. Mr. Sterling looked worried. "Brielle, is this true? If the evidence is inadmissible." The room tensed up again. Adler's lawyer looked triumphant. He thought he had found a loophole to save his client. I looked at the lawyer. I started to smile. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was a victory smile. "I anticipated that," I said. I walked to the head of the table. "You're right about the contract clause. It's very standard. But there is one problem." I looked at the empty chair where Isolde had sat. Isolde was very lazy. She was so busy covering up Adler's crimes that she never actually filed my HR paperwork. I pulled a blank, unsigned contract from my folder. I never signed the official employment contract. Isolde forgot to give it to me on my first day. Technically, for the last 6 months, I wasn't an employee. The lawyer's smile vanished. "I was a volunteer," I said. "A visitor. The IP is mine. The evidence is mine. And I am sharing it with the board as a shareholder." The legal threat evaporated into thin air. There was no contract to breach. The lawyer froze. He looked at his papers, then at me. He realized he had nothing. He snapped his briefcase shut. "I see," he said. He didn't even look back at the door as he walked out on his own client. I stood at the head of the table. The silence now was one of respect, not fear. I looked at the remaining, shaken board members. They looked at me like I was my grandfather reborn. "This company isn't being sold," I said firmly. "We are keeping the factories. We are protecting the pension fund. And we are going to fix the logistics with the plan I wrote." I looked them in the eye. "We are going back to work." I walked out of the building 10 minutes later. The air outside was fresh and cold. It had started to rain. I saw Adler on the sidewalk. He was standing by his box of belongings, which had been dumped on the wet pavement. He was frantically tapping on his phone, trying to call an Uber that wouldn't come. His expensive suit was getting soaked. He looked up and saw me. His eyes were wide, begging. He looked pathetic. I walked past him without breaking my stride. Ronan had pulled my grandfather's vintage Rolls-Royce up to the curb. I got in the back seat. The leather was warm and soft. "Home, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Yes," I said. I didn't look back at Adler. They told me nobody listens to an intern. They were right. That's why I became the boss.